Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode. Today I'm sitting down with one of my favorites in the space, Verlin Gradney, who is the founder of Mindset Startup Academy, as well as a partner in Trade Desk Advisors. And Verlin teaches people who are trying to raise capital, whether it's for their blockchain project or otherwise, how to speak the same language as investors. Verlin, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you on. How are things going in the neck of the woods?
Fantastic. No, it's good to be back on again. I think, like everyone, we're dealing with new realities, but we're getting by. So yeah, I think we're all very poised. We're spending a little bit more time with clients, just nothing specifically, just touching out, which I think is a good thing for a lot of us in this particular space, right? Just keep a pulse, pick up the phone, call people, see how they're doing, and get some advice as well on how they're handling things.
Yeah, I think that a little bit of compassion goes a long way. I didn't really want to date this video, but I just think that it is the current state that we're in right now, of course, given the times. And I wanted to ask you, because it was a question that I had one of my viewers who wanted me to ask you, what are some of the remedies for those who are currently performing a capital raise, whether it be in blockchain or otherwise? I know there's probably a lot of people out there who are a little bit nervous with what's going on with the coronavirus. What recommendations do you have to make to them?
For those that are either considering or conducting a raise now?
Yes.
It's a good one because obviously, as you stated in the beginning, all we do each and every day is work with companies who are about to and are currently conducting. And the questions come across to us a number of times as well. And my mind keeps hearkening back to the last two financial recessions. I mean, those are two major financials just in my own career. And, whether we were raising capital or managing capital, it wasn't an easy time. So the way we've been handling it for clients is twofold. First is sort of bifurcating where they're at. If they're preparing or considering, that's one bucket. If they're actually in the midst of actually conducting, particularly if they've actually taken some capital in, that's a whole separate strategy. So for those that are preparing or conducting, there's the obvious, okay, do we want to hold or postpone this particular process off? And the primary reason being, no one has a golden solution to this, Matt, but the big concern is, especially if you're just going after what we call non-professional investors, which are your non-funds and angel groups, we have to be cognizant of the fact of whether or not liquid capital that was there yesterday is still there. Or better said, is that the liquid capital that was considered risk capital for that investor, has that changed in their minds? Is that something they want to hunker down on? So if they're preparing or getting ready and considering, what we've been doing with them is, if there's no specific immediate need, then we've been using the time to basically go back through each of the processes, test them, and then use this creative time to basically go out for advice. I think I may have said it before, the old adage, ask for money, get advice, ask for advice, get money. This is a great time for a lot of these founders to stop thinking of just those who are check holders and start looking at ways they can build rosters. A lot of the advisors and executives they've been talking about are probably sitting at their home office like I'm doing right now, which is extremely rare for them. So let's use that. And the second one, for those that are actually conducting a raise right now and feel that pumping the brakes is something that could be really devastating, then what we're recommending is just a few tweaks. So what I mean by that is, you might have a 3 to 4 step sales process that you like to take someone through, from introduction to essentially asking, are you in or are you out, right? And what we're recommending, the same way we did in previous recessions when a lot of money went away, or a lot of money went from risk to really conservative capital, is we basically edited up our sales process. So rather than ending with the close, are you in or are you out, we would come up with something creative that would basically leave it a little open-ended. Because we knew that if we were to ask for that check right now, although they may like us and really like what we're doing, that decision matrix at that particular point in time is not tilted in our favor. And for obvious, well-warranted reasons, right? So we're encouraging the companies that we're talking to figure out a way, as I like to say, just build your tent. You just want as many people in the tent. So tell your story, don't do the hard pitch, and come up with an action plan where you can circle back with those folks and say, given the current environment times, we're not really looking right now at this particular point for you to make a financial decision. I'm just looking to see if there's any level of interest. We're thinking about circling back with everyone in Q3. Would that work for you? And then when you do set those dates, find something creative, not salesy, not predatory. Find something creative that you can put all of those people that you just brought into your tent on a consistent loop. So that's what we've been telling a lot of the clients. I think at these particular times, companies who are selling or people who are raising have to be really careful that what you're doing is not coming off as cheesy, let alone predatory. I've already started to see a couple LinkedIn messages where I'm like, how did you just try to bring your business around to coronavirus? There's no correlation. So to me, let's not lose brand value in this process as well the financial losses.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. One of the main reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, aside from everything that's going on in the world, is because there was a new issuance by the SEC. And I know that you were particularly excited about it. I was as well after speaking to you. Can you kind of give us the Coles notes on that issuance and maybe some of your opinions thereof?
Yeah, sure. So for those, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar, 2012 Jobs Act came under Obama administration that created crowdfunding. And the SEC has been chipping away at this thing. In 2015, we got greater clarification for non-accredited investors and a few other little things that they've been chipping away at. But on March 4th, and I'll just give you the Cliff Note version here, the SEC made a release, which anyone can go on Google and search, where they made some pretty tremendous, what I would consider dramatic changes to crowdfunding. They are what we'll cover here in a second, but that bulletin went out. And then, as typically with any regulation, we now are in a comment period for 60 days, or sometimes we call it securities the quiet period. So this is the process before they actually decide what's going to go into the bill and then make it law. So the first thing they did is they declared and made it public domain. We're in a 60-day comment period, which will put us somewhere around mid-May, let's call it, early May, that will end. And then typically we're going to have anywhere between a month or two where they're going to aggregate all of those comments and then cement the final law changes. And here's what those are, at least as of today, sitting in the comment period. Taking the raise amount for crowdfunding from $1 million to $5 million. Huge jump. When you look at the contribution limits as they stand now for accredited and non-accredited investors, because you're allowed to market crowdfunding in the public domain, which was a first of itself, the way that the SEC, with influences from FINRA and others, manage the concerns of consumer protection is they put a limit on the amounts. And so those limits for accredited and non-accredited are essentially based upon your income level. So, if you make less than 100,000 or net worth less than 100,000, it's, no more than 2%, all the way up to someone that could be at $1 million, that could do up to 10%. Well, in the new rules that they sent out that we're in quiet period for, not only did the total amount of contribution go from $1 million to $5 million, but they stated without definitive detail of potentially dramatically increasing the amount of contributions that accredited investors can make. They then doubled down and said that we're interested or could potentially change or increase the contribution limits for non-accredited investors. So now you're thinking, okay, this sounds rosy. Well, to us geeks in the business, that wasn't even the icing on the cake. The icing on the cake was the idea of bringing in what's called, or sometimes referred to as, a testing the water period. Okay, so if you're a public company, we would call this sort of a soft circle. But testing the water period is essentially an opportunity for startups who are considering a raise. Maybe have never done it before. They're not quite sure which exemption they're going to use. So they would have, within very strict rules and guidelines, the ability to actually market in the public domain to gain interest. Yeah. And for us guys that have been in this for a long time, that just went boom, right? Now, before anyone gets too excited and starts creating the brochures, let's just be realistic. We can probably bet the farm that what you're allowed to utilize in material or communication strategies in your testing the water period is going to be extremely limited. You're most likely not going to be able to talk anything about investment. It's more of, hey, I'm here. This is what I do. Contact us to learn more. Contact us here or fill out this form. We're doing a survey for customer surveys for our product market fit type analysis. So, but it's at least that idea, as I always like to say, and just reference, of building your tent. So those were the major differences. If everything stays through the comment period and gets implemented, it will be pretty interesting, but I still have my own reservations.
Yeah, I think that crowdfunding opening up a little bit and increasing those limits is really interesting myself. We've spoken a little bit about that, but being able to raise $5 million now by soliciting the general public, I think is probably pretty exciting. What would you say some of the implications are for the general equities market? And particularly, knowing my background, what are some of the implications potentially for blockchain?
Yeah, good question. And, again, this is a bit kind of far in the weeds for a lot of us, and I'm sure this is going to be extremely subjective. So maybe handling the question from a more macroeconomic perspective as opposed to micro. And let's just look at the U.S. itself, since this is a U.S.-related rule. You've seen lobbyists inside the United States, from those who represent financial services and financial planners, all the way down to those down at, say, the Angel Capital Association and others, really beating the door with the SEC to really loosen the purse strings for accredited investor. And the synopsis of those hollerings at the door are essentially $200,000 or $300,000 joint, $1 million net worth was fine a couple of decades ago. But that doesn't hold water anymore. You can't tell me in today's day and age, with technology and different trades and skill sets and age groups working, that that's a real litmus for someone who's quote unquote knowledgeable, right? So if you were to expand that out, now here comes this rule that's continuing to tap. Remember, 2012, 2015, bombshell 2020. If this trend line continues, the big boost inside of the economy is we could see potentially individual investors, accredited and non, begin to really be exposed and educated to what alternative investments are. And what I mean by that is Wall Street and financial services has had a grip on everyone in their retirement plan, right? And they liked it that way, and they got high on the hog off mutual funds and others. Well, those in the know are aware that those type investment strategies have been having a very difficult time really providing any alpha or anything above the average to justify their fee. And so you got a lot of baby boomers out there who have started taking from the Schwab and the E-Trade accounts and moving into self-directed brokerage. But a lot of times what Americans are doing when they're leaving the ivory towers of Wall Street is going into safe bets like real estate, things that they know, touch, see, and feel. But if this trend line continues and the early stage marketplace, conservatively, we're not taking grandma's pension here, but we're to just start slicing little percentages of opportunity of risk capital from a much larger audience, you could see the amount of venture capital that moves or early stage capital that moves literally triple or quadruple. Now, that may not sound too beneficial to a mass audience, but let's keep this macro. You have an industry like this that begins moving 4 times the tens of billions of dollars. Think about how many more startups are actually funded. And even if they're not successful, think about how many jobs were created, how many benefit programs went out there. If you believe in the concept of trickle-down economics, that's probably a larger potential stimulus package than the government could ever write a check for. Now, it's a slow drip. It takes a lot of time. So these particular changes, and blockchain's a big component of that, right? More and more people beginning to understand, ask questions. So imagine if blockchain itself as an industry had an audience probably 6 times the size that they have now, where people were able to just sort of dip their toes in. Well, $1,000 may not sound like a lot, but if you got 1,000 of those people, you got $1 million for your raise, right? So blockchain and any other asset class that is popular or maybe not as popular now, this could have dramatic impacts. You're seeing a changing of the guard, right?
Yeah.
It's not just investment bankers and VC guys and financial planners and financial services who hold the gateway to your financial future. Those walls are being chipped at, and we're starting to begin to see them crumble. I think diversifying that level of capital, putting it into small business, is a phenomenal potential way for the overall U.S. economy to grow. And as the economists say, if the U.S. gets a cold, the rest of the world gets a flu. Well, that works vice versa. If the U.S. does really well, there's trickle-down effects for the world.
Yeah. For me, I'm excited particularly because I think that the opportunity for non-accredited investors to put capital into blockchain projects is just a more fair economic exchange than what currently exists with the ICO market, where people are able to actually own a piece of equity all within the rules and the guidelines of their favorite project. I think that that's just a much better exchange than some of these alternative models for some of these tokens that might not have proper economic incentives. So that's why I'm really excited about it as well.
I agree.
We've talked before, and you've kind of mentioned that there are some fundamental things about crowdfunding that you don't necessarily like. I'm using euphemisms for reasons that we've talked about before. But does this fundamentally solve all the issues with crowdfunding?
Absolutely not. It's great, and I'm not going to to damage these new options and position them as strictly wallpaper, but they're far more than that for the reasons I just stated of long-term economic factors. However, in being as analytical as we are, which is what we get paid to do, did this plug all the holes in the boat? Not really. You have to look at the major issues of crowdfunding and why we've been on the sidelines with crowdfunding itself. A lot of what we do is Reg D related work for companies. The reason being is when this was created, and it's barely not even 10 years old yet, right? Yeah. The very first set of platforms that came out of the gate did it a certain way, and everyone else fell in line. It's time now that we begin kind of taking a look and deciding, were all of these done the proper way? Was it the most effective? Let's be honest, crowdfunding had some decent opportunities, but it didn't really blow anyone's skirt up here. And the primary reason is a lot of times the accredited investors, the larger check models, you didn't see a large penetration rate with them inside of the markets. They weren't necessarily very fond of putting their capital with a bunch of other people they don't know at a couple $1,000. They weren't too fancy of that. They didn't like the level of due diligence that they were getting inside, which is some basic performance. And also, too, they typically had no right or ability to negotiate the terms. So they might like a project, but if they are totally off on your valuation, then they just walked away. And so crowdfunding never really penetrated a deeper level of sophisticated capital. It was a wide, broad audience, really by the laws, that was basically designed to just kind of move some capital in. And a lot of companies got benefit from it. But to me, the governors were still on that engine. It wasn't able to truly explore its true horsepower. And not to say that it's bad, it's just young, right? So now here come these new laws that are stating new potential, but it's like, wait a minute. Unless you can truly figure out how you're going to attract more of the accredited investor audience, what value is it that you just increase their limits? Well, in my brain, the SEC understands some of the functionalities we're talking about here, that it's not being deeply penetrated by accredited, and they're kind of making it a little bit easier, right? Yeah. So you've got to really figure out, how do you create real pull within the accredited investor market? How can you truly create the environment where a big boy can come in, get all the tools and resources that he needs to make an honest due diligence and decision, and actually write a $250,000 check? And then have a bunch of other non-accredited investors begin to follow that, like they do on Angel List, and continue to follow his lead on the process. Now we're gaining huge momentum. Same thing for the limit. If a lot of companies aren't really maxing out their $1 and $2 million, then $5 million, we need some fundamental changes into the way that more sophisticated accredited investors are able to interact with crowdfunding in the way that they're used to on their own or with their own funds. And that's deep level due diligence, the ability to see the whites of the eyes of those founders, potentially meet with them, and the ability to disagree on a particular valuation of the model, but still be able to get a deal done. You've got to be able to remove some of those governors in order for these new opportunities that have just potentially come down the pipe to truly go into force.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and some really, really good insight based on some of our previous conversations. Where would you like to see crowdfunding head in relation to some of these new changes?
Without tipping my hat too much here, I would say that there's an opportunity for crowdfunding to get a facelift. I do. I think there's an opportunity for the reasons that I just stated. I think we as an early stage community have kind of looked at it from the sidelines, and I think there's great opportunities with crowdfunding and within these new particular rules to open new markets, to turn traditional capital that before didn't think they could do what they like to do as an investor within those confines and prove it to them. I think you can. And I think as you begin, it's always an 80-20 rule, right? There's always certain leaders that once they begin to make the move, everyone else looks around, right, and goes, okay, well, he moved. Okay, well, maybe we should try it. So someone's got to be first. So being able to kind of remove those shackles, take what is essentially a law. We have to remember, crowdfunding is not the website. That's just someone's interpretation of the rules that were put on paper. So it's time for folks to start taking a new look, looking at that law through a new lens, and then looking at the actual supply and demand functions and making new and intuitive sense to say, this is ways that we might be able to utilize this law to more effect. And I think that's the key thing here is crowdfunding is not this website model. Crowdfunding is a law. It's very long. It's very precise. You really think that website is capturing its true potential? It's not. So hopefully these new opportunities and expansion of investment amounts as well as dollar raise amounts will entice enough people to revisit that law and put a different spin on it.
Verlin, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate you sitting down with me. Having worked with you in the past, if anybody's interested in getting in touch with Verlin, I'm going to make sure I put all of your information below. If you're a founder looking to learn how to speak the language of investors, Verlin has some fantastic courses all the way through to full counseling and services to be able to get you from inception all the way through your raise. So Verlin, thank you so much. I look forward to doing more of these. Stay safe out there and you have a fantastic day.
You're very welcome. Thank you.